broadcasting is no longer a toy. It is a world's force. Can there be anything more magical than this unseen voice that comes through your wireless set?
The set of 1915, the ABC's biggest yet television drama production. In our golden anniversary year, the national broadcaster looks back to the days before broadcasting existed in this country, when it was a dream about to be fulfilled. The dream of a truly national broadcasting service for Australia became reality on this day at this time 50 years ago. And today, it's become one of the world's largest broadcasting networks owned by the people. I'm David Flatman, and tonight I'd like you to join me on a journey through those years for a look at some of the memorable events, some of the people and programs that go to make up your national broadcasting service. In 1932, when the ABC was formed by Act of Parliament, its job was to provide adequate and comprehensive programs for the people of Australia. And today we may well ask, how well has it done that job? 50 years ago, broadcasting in Australia was still very primitive. Music was a major part of programming. Much of that music was played live in the studio by orchestra and instrumentalist. But recorded music was played on old acoustic gramophones like this, with 78 records. And the sound from that acoustic gramophone was picked up by a carbon microphone. This is called a Reese mic, and it's set in a solid block of marble. And the sound picked up by that was then transmitted to air and sounded something like this. The Florentine March, the very first record ever played on the ABC. This then is how the ABC began on the 1st of July, 1932.
This service, the ABC, now belongs to you. We are your trustees, managers. It is a service that is not run for profit, but purely in the interests of every section of the community. It becomes a national service in which we hope every Australian will take pride.
Since 1923, when radio began in Australia, people had thrilled to the wonderful voice of Nellie Melba. But many still regarded broadcasting as a flash in the pan. The whole world was deep in the grip of the Depression, with unemployment running at 30% in 1932. Having a radio was not high on the list of priorities for most people. Even those who could afford it were more concerned with the challenge of living than with entertainment and pleasure. Consequently, they didn't know what radio could offer them. Nevertheless, out of the Depression grew the National Broadcasting Service. Up to 1929, most of the country's radio stations had been privately owned and set up. 2BL Sydney by Broadcasters Limited, 2FC by Farmer and Company, 3LO Melbourne by the Broadcasting Company of Australia, 6WF Perth by Westralian Farmers Limited, while 4QG Brisbane belonged to the Queensland Government. In 1929, a company called the Australian Broadcasting Company took over about half of the stations to provide a non-commercial service supported by revenue from licence fees. The Postmaster General's Department bought all the non-commercial stations in 1929 and 1930, and the programs were provided by the Australian Broadcasting Company. Then in 1932, the Act changed the company to the Commission. The staff and facilities were taken over, and the ABC began. The new service was destined not only to bring the remote areas of Australia together, but also to bring the southern continent closer to the rest of the world. The BBC British Empire Broadcasting Service permitted live participation between countries on opposite sides of the world.
Listeners near and far, kith and kin, I extend to you a greeting of goodwill and feel honoured the privilege of responding to the toast, United Empire.
And on Christmas Day 1932, the monarch was able for the first time to deliver his greeting personally to his subjects across the world.
Through one of the marvels of modern science, I am enabled this Christmas Day to speak to all my peoples throughout the empire. I speak now from my home and from my heart to you all. To men and women so cut off by the snows, the desert, or the sea, that only voices out of the air can reach them.
These were the years of the bodyline bowling controversy that nearly caused a severe rift in Anglo-Australian relations. And cricket fever was running high. Consequently, whenever cricket was played, radio came into its own, and rapidly increasing licence numbers reflected the growing interest. But there were major difficulties in receiving shortwave descriptions of games played in other parts of the world. Often, poor reception conditions made it impossible. The bright young men of radio were not to be deterred, however, and they soon found a way around the problem, led by a man destined to become general manager of the ABC, Charles Moses.
On the eve of the 1938 Test Cricket Series, I have been asked to explain to you how the synthetic ball-by-ball descriptions are broadcast by the national stations. Let us follow the course of a typical message as received in the Commission's Sydney studios only a minute after the actual happening on the test ground in England. This cable is taken down in duplicate and immediately amplified by cricket experts who fill in details regarding field placements on model cricket fields for the commentator, whom you can now see broadcasting his description from the amplified cable information. As the shot is made, the effects man, who has in front of him a copy of the cable message, drops the needle on an effects record, and listeners hear the applause of the crowd as the shot reaches the boundary. And now, let us listen in.
Farms bowling to Bradman. It's a short ball. Bradman moves back and pulls fiercely past square leg. Hutton running well from deep fine leg has no chance. The ball goes under the ropes for another 4. That's 4 more to Bradman, taking his score to 97, a typical Bradman shot, giving the fieldsman no chance of saving the boundary. Now Ames throws the ball back to Farnes. Farnes turns, runs in, bowling to Bradman. This ball well pitched. Bradman moves forward, drives. Cotton at cover tries to cut it off, but is beaten by the pace of the ball, and it races away for another 4.
The following for cricket was such that fans often went to ridiculous heights to hear a game. And that meant a great boost to licence revenue, with more and more people buying radios, as Sir Charles Moses recalls.
It almost doubled the revenue, and this was very important. First, it enabled us to spend more money on other programs, and that is very important from our point of view. But it also provided revenue for the Postmaster General's Department, which was able to develop the regional network. It was from then on that the national network started to be extended to various regional centres throughout Australia.
With growing licence numbers, more than 1 million by 1937, the ABC was able to look to areas of serious programming, appointing its first official musical advisor, Sir Bernard Heinz, whose life story was the subject of an ABC documentary on his retirement in 1975. ABC dance bands were set up, a military band and concert orchestra all permanently engaged, and in 1934, free concerts for school children began. The young Bernard Heinz was in his element.
Joseph Haydn was a man who liked to play jokes. And that's just what he did in this symphony you're about to hear. There's a point in the second movement when the music grows very quiet. And then suddenly there's a loud chord, which Haydn intended to wake up all those ladies and gentlemen who were nodding off to sleep at the concert.
It was then that we became aware that it was important that the concert should be further developed. And the only people in the world who could afford to develop them any further was the ABC. And I went to Mr. Cleary and to Sir Charles Moses, and I put the point to them that all the orchestras in Australia should be invited to combine with the Australian Broadcasting Commission to present a united front in Australia of symphonic music. They determined to help this idea, and furthermore to create interest in symphonic concerts by bringing out well-known and of course eminent conductors from abroad. The first one was Hamilton Harty. The next one then was Malcolm Sargent. After Malcolm Sargent came Zell, and at the end of the time Sir Thomas Beecham came. And from then on, the orchestras began to increase in importance in the public mind and also importance in the official mind.
Commercial stations, as well as the ABC, staged live broadcasts of music like Cess Morrison's dance band, which formed a large part of the radio music content. Other bands like those of Jim Davidson and Jim Gussie entertained ABC listeners, concert audiences and soldiers in wartime for many years.
Happy days are here again.
By the late 30s, radio in Australia was becoming an accepted part of everyday life. It entertained, provided news, education programs, drama and competitions. These young aviation enthusiasts built their models from instructions given on the wireless and had regular meetings to show them off. Towards the end of the decade, the climate began to change. Airmail services to Europe began, George V died, Kingsford Smith made his epic flight from England, and George VI was crowned. Sydney's 150th anniversary was celebrated, and the rumblings of war grew louder.
Für Sie genügt nicht die bloße Ablegung des Bekenntnisses, ich glaube, sondern der Schwur, ich kämpfe.
From the outbreak of war, radio dramatically underlined the power of the spoken word in uniting a nation under devastating attack. It was a tool used to the full by Winston Churchill during the Battle of Britain and later.
Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duty. So bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its commonwealths last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour.
And as well as their leaders, listeners would hear for the first time the sounds of battle from the front line through radio.
There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there are about 10 German machines dive bombing a British convoy, which is just out to sea in the Channel. As here they come in absolute steep dive, and you can see their bombs actually leave the machines and come into the water. You can hear our own guns going like anything now. No, we thought he'd got a German one had been got then, but now the British fighters are coming up. That was a bomb, as you may imagine. There's one coming down in flames. Somebody's hit a German, and he's going down completely out of control, and he's going slap into the sea, and there he goes, smash!
Back home in Australia, a whole generation of young men from all over the country lined up to volunteer for the armed forces. Most of them were the sons of World War I soldiers, but theirs was to be a very different war from their fathers. The dawning age of technology meant that these men were marching off to a conflict vastly different from any other in history. And on the battlefield, that meant more sophisticated weapons and communication equipment. But it also meant they would share their fortunes in war with those they were leaving behind. Over the next 6 years, the wireless would be the bearer of news, both good and bad, and would establish itself as a permanent part of our way of life.
Australia calling. Australia calling. Australia calling the world. Station VLQ2. V for victory, L for liberty, Q for quality.
One of the first moves of the newly formed Department of Information was to ask the ABC to set up a shortwave division. Its purpose was to receive overseas shortwave broadcasts and also to transmit propaganda and news. The service would later become known as Radio Australia. As our troops embarked for overseas, All broadcasting was placed under the National Security Act, and the ABC placed its facilities and services at the disposal of the Department of Information. It then agreed to provide national news bulletins to the commercial stations. And with the AIF, bound for the Middle East, went an ABC mobile unit. A unit that would travel with them into war and send home news from the front, as well as receiving shortwave news from home. This is the sort of equipment that the war correspondents used in the field to get their voice reports back home. Portable, yes, but certainly no fun to lug this around the jungles and the highlands of New Guinea. And in the Western Desert, they used even bigger models than this because they had vehicles to carry the large batteries around. In the days before tape recording, the only way they could get their reports back was on disc. And so they used this sort of equipment. This is a wind-up model called a midget recorder, and an acetate disc. It was a disc of aluminium coated on both sides with acetate. When you dropped the recording head on it, it cut a groove in the disc, and the war correspondent talked through the microphone, and so you ended up with a record which was sent home and a couple of days later played on the air. It was because of the efforts of men using equipment like this in battlefields all over the world that we're able to listen today to some of their reports of the fighting.
Looking straight up the coast, all I can't see it very clearly from my present position.
Once in the battle zones, the war correspondents went to work. They sent back graphic descriptions of fighting, personal messages from diggers to their families, general descriptions of the places where they lived and died, and recordings of their concerts. One of the most prolific and best known of our war correspondents, later seconded to the BBC, was Chester Wilmot, who went with our troops into many battles like Tobruk.
Defied and harassed the Germans and Italians for so many months. So long as men speak of the AIF, they'll speak of Tobruk and of the men who manned these guns. Men from Australia, Britain, India, Poland. There's no need to tell again of the heroism, the patience and the doggedness of this garrison. The world knows that already. But Tobruk is more than a front line and more than a fortress.
Back home, the war came right to our doorstep with the bombing of Darwin on the 19th of February 1942, the first attack of the war on Australian soil. Singapore had fallen, the Japanese were deeply entrenched in the Pacific, and Australia anticipated the assault from the north. Prime Minister Curtin wasted no time mobilising the population.
The full cabinet today directed the War Cabinet to gazette the necessary regulations for the complete mobilisation and the complete ordering of all the resources, human and material, in this Commonwealth for the defence of this Commonwealth.
A renewed sense of national unity swept the country. More young men rushed to enlist. The war effort was doubled and redoubled. Australia prepared for the onslaught. People boarded up, battened down, blacked out and prepared for the worst. Even the beaches were obstructed with barbed wire to impede an invasion. The radio urged more women to join the wartime workforce.
So urgent is the need for women that at present highly skilled tradesmen have to leave important jobs to take on work that girls fresh from school could master in half an hour. With more men needed in the fighting areas, it is left to women to come forward and make possible production on a scale that will turn the balance between defeat and victory.
Wartime concerts to help the war effort at home were staged beginning in 1940. Noel Coward was one of the first performers to come in November and December of that year on a visit sponsored by the government. Also from overseas, from the Blitz in London and other devastated areas of England, came the children, separated from their families and sent to Australia, where they'd be safe until it was over and they could return home. They even brought their own gas masks.
How are you, dear? All right, thank you. How are you? Very well, thank you.
From time to time, the ABC combined with the BBC to give the refugee children the chance of talking to their parents back home. These sessions, Children Calling Home, saw touching reunions with parents and families via shortwave radio and were broadcast over the national network.
Back from Glasgow to London, and here are Mr. and Mrs. Dwyer, who want to talk to Patrick.
And here is Patrick. Come along, Patrick. Come along, here we are. Here are your mother and father calling for you. Say hello.
Hello, Pat. Say good morning.
Hello. Hello, Mum.
Hello, Pat.
How are you getting on, Mum?
All right, thank you. We've written lots of letters to you, and I've sent you a parcel, which I hope you'll...
I haven't received the parcel yet.
You will soon.
I'm having a lovely time out here.
Thanks.
Glasgow still belongs to me.
Threatened forever.
How's your garden, Sydney?
It's getting on fine. I've got lots of tomatoes, and you don't need a hothouse either.
In New Guinea, the Japanese grip on the Pacific War was weakening. In the air and in the swamps, jungles and mountainous terrain of the highlands, the Australians, with a lot of help from their friends, were beginning to turn the tide. War correspondent Fred Simpson sent back numerous reports from New Guinea.
At the moment we've got a grandstand view of the bombing of a ridge. I should say it would be about 2.5 miles from here. The Beauforts are going in. There are the bombs. I can see them leaving the aircraft at this very moment. Prior to the aircraft going over, the artillery pointed the target by sending over smoke shells. Over the target now there's a very dense cloud of smoke, and that of course is pinpointing it for the bombers as they go in. There, another 3 moving in. The Jap position.
The final blows that ended World War II were delivered on August 6th and 9th, 1945, when atomic bombs devastated Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Never before had the world witnessed such a disastrous toll in a single war action. Back home, rejoicing people filled the streets of Sydney with gay abandon. Even Talbot Duck Manton, the ABC's on-the-spot commentator, was excited.
Yes, Sydney is gay today. Just at the intersection of Martin Place and George Street, there's a solid mass of people. Soldiers, sailors, girls with yellow flowers in their hair, some of them, Union Jacks and paper hats. A little farther down, about 40, it must be 40 or more, young people. There's some British sailors and some of our soldiers, girls and Marines, and they're all doing the hokey pokey. They're putting their, let me see, left foot in, there we go, turn it all around. The trams are still running in Pitt Street, very slowly, and they're crowded. This is a very happy crowd. They're mad with excitement.
As soon as the war was over, the ABC returned to its entrepreneurial role of bringing overseas celebrities to Australia. The first was New Zealand soprano Joan Hammond, warmly welcomed by General Manager Charles Moses.
I'm now looking forward to singing to you, and it'll be my joy and pleasure to come back as a singer.
The next 10 years would see an unprecedented influx of top-name entertainers. After crying his way into the hearts of Australian youth, Johnny Ray's welcome signified the huge growth in entertainment since the war, stimulated and encouraged by radio. And hometown boy made good, Robert Helpman, returned for the Old Vic Theatre Company with a radiant Katharine Hepburn.
I'm just thrilled to be back and to have the honour to appear with the Old Vic, and the great honour to appear with a star like Kate.
Thank you very much. Very exciting to me, too, to be here.
Another Australian expatriate who owed his success to the great popularity of radio was Dick Bentley of Take It From Here fame.
I suppose you're wondering exactly why the wild colonial boys returned.
In Australia, his shows were required listening for many thousands.
In the days of sailing ships.
I want to thank Jack Davy for handling all these ceremonies out here, and I was on his show just a few nights ago, and I'm sure that he's big enough to make a comeback. Thank you very, very much.
On the local and overseas scene, two of the biggest radio stars of all, Jack Davy and Bob Hope, enjoy a round of golf in sunny Sydney. Their popularity on radio, and in Hope's case, film as well, demonstrated the vast growth in entertainment and broadcasting as people forgot the dark years of the war. And while people were enthusiastically supporting radio and its stars,
wake up and listen.
How seriously did the broadcasters take themselves?
The time is now 7 minutes past 8.
This special film on the ABC and its workings was made in the early 50s by the Department of the Interior, now Film Australia.
I beg your pardon. The time is now 8 minutes past 7.
Whilst we're waiting on the result of that photo finish, let's hear further descriptions of the international tennis.
Radio Australia, if you'd like to join us, your listeners will be interested in these descriptions.
Serving up Satius, forehand return.
The ABC presents the Sporting Roundup.
Now that I am in your arms at last.
One of the ABC's post-war radio producers, and later one of its first television producers, Harry Pringle, created and produced a number of the early entertainment shows that were so popular.
There wasn't a sudden jump into something marvellous because the war was over. You were going to get terrific programs because you'd already had very good programs. Commercials had nothing compared to ABC. They might have had the Sunday night drama show, its name I won't mention, where people switched their lights off at 8 o'clock every Sunday night and sat back and listened to this dramatic play. And they had nothing on the light entertainment side. They had no orchestras.
With Muriel Steinbeck, John Saul, John McCallum, and Reginald Collins.
Listen, Chief, if we don't get the lowdown on this Grant case soon, the public will be howling blue murder.
Well, let them howl blue murder. We can't do the impossible. Yes?
Chief Inspector Billington to see you, Mr. Saunders.
Well, tell him I've gone to
The show was called The Lux Theatre on commercial radio, and there were more like it in the heyday of radio drama. People used to stay home on Sunday night just to listen. But if you were in the audience, they were just as much fun to watch.
There he is, right ahead. The big blue sedan. I can only get close enough, I'd have a putt at it.
Be careful, Jim. This road's none too good.
Never mind, it's all or nothing. Here we go.
Look out, Jim. He's got a gun, too.
In 1946, with the help of state governments and city councils, the ABC set up the first permanent symphony orchestras. Here, in Sydney's Centennial Park, the guns of the Royal Australian Artillery and the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Sir Eugene Goossens, play the 1812 Overture. Another man who for many years had a big influence on the musical development of thousands of children was Lindley Evans, Mr. Melody Man of the Argonauts Club. As a young man in the 20s, Lindley Evans had travelled overseas with Dame Nellie Melba as her accompanist. When the radio children's sessions began during the war, he became musical mentor to many of the 120,000 children who over the years were members of the Argonauts Club, making the Argonauts the most influential children's program in the history of radio, and the best remembered.
Hello, girls and boys.
And hello from Sue.
And Jimmy, too.
First of all, we're going to hear from the muddle-headed Wombat, whose stories are written by Ruth Park. One warm spring day, Wombat was lying on his back in the creek with the water washing about him. Mouse was sitting on his stomach and playing Robinson Crusoe.
Your tummy is just like an island, Wombat.
Well, I'm glad I have a tummy like an island mouse for my very unlovely mouse to play on.
The Argonauts, one of the most popular, probably the most popular children's session ever on radio, and Jimmy, John Hewitt, one of the best known of the people. That must bring back memories for you, John.
Certainly. Very happy memories too, David.
Who are the people there with you?
There we had dear old Mac, Athol Fleming, who left us a few years ago, and Sue, or Sue Newton, as she was known then. She was one of the many mice in the muddle-headed Wombat. We had quite a few of them.
Do you find that people today still know you as well as they did then?
Oh, yes. I still get an occasional cry of Jimmy from across a crowded room.
How
I
does
still
that
answer to
feel?
them. Well, you see, when I joined the program, there was another John in the program, so they had to give me another name, and it was Jimmy. And it became like John Jimmy. I answered to both. I still bark all the time when they say Jimmy.
Just how important was that sort of radio programming to children in those days?
Oh, tremendously important. I think we had such a following. I mean, we had something like between 70,000 and 100,000 members over that period of time. It ran for some 30-odd years. I was with it for 18 years. And, of course, we went through quite a few generations of children who grew up, and then their own children joined the club. And it was a great program, unique in the world, I think, because of the importance of the stimulus to children in interesting them in music, literature, painting. And we had some very fine experts, Lindley Evans, Mr. Melody Man, Geoffrey Smart, who's a very well-known painter, took care of the artistic side, and we had, the mind boggles a bit at the number of literary people we had there.
It was a different kind of children's program, wasn't it? I mean, when television came, the whole thing changed.
Well, it did. We tried, when television first started here, to transfer the Argonaut Club to television, but it didn't work. It was strictly a radio format. So the Argonauts just sort of folded away a few years after that. And the television side, of course, took on a different format.
What do you think has changed about the sorts of things that children want today that means that they're not as interested in perhaps the more cultural side that the Argonauts offered them?
I don't think there's much opportunity for them to get that sort of thing in television. In those days, well, of course, with radio, the imagination is allowed to run riot. As with the dear old muddle-headed Wombat, which was one of our favourites there. It's a fantasy world that doesn't really exist anymore now on television, except for the cartoons, and that's not the same.
Yes. Well, radio was very important to children in those days. We've got a few more clips for you to have a look at.
Indeed.
First of all, let's have a look and see the way you said goodnight.
Aha.
But, look, what am I talking about? You're getting me rattled. And now it's good night time. Good night, everyone.
Jolly good night to you, and you, and you, and you, and you. So the time has come to finish, and I'll say that now is through.
Now, children, you be a train. When the music stops, that means the signal's against you. So you stop. Excuse me, Geoffrey.
Can't.
Of course you can. Why ever not?
Oh, trying.
Well, then I'm an aeroplane.
We're going to hear the story of Jack the Giant Killer. Helen, what is a giant?
He's an overgrown man.
Terry, who was Jack?
Jack was a little boy who killed the giant.
Now, this is the story of the great big giant. And the little boy Jack.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jack.
If you don't care for your teeth, they'll hurt. Go to your dentist twice a year. Clean your teeth twice a day. And, of course, don't do silly things like chewing the ends of pencils.
This is the ABC broadcasting through national, regional, and shortwave stations. This is the news read by Paul McClure. And now the headlines.
The news. That was the next of the ABC's functions to be upgraded in the post-war years. In 1947, the Labor government changed the Broadcasting Act to provide funding for the ABC by parliamentary appropriation. No longer would the organisation have to rely on the unpredictable nature of licence revenue. And the government legislated to give the ABC its own independent news service, with its own resources at home and overseas. The man who set up that independent news was its first federal editor, Frank Dixon.
I had an interview with John Curtin in Melbourne when he was Leader of the Opposition, and told him of my hope that at least when they got into power later on, he would support the establishment of an independent news service. He said he would, provided there was some guarantee that the Labor Party would get a better deal from it than it had been getting from the newspapers. I said that as far as I was concerned, it would get a fair deal, nothing more and nothing less. He said they never wanted any more. Labor never wanted more than a fair deal.
The members of the government felt that as long as the news was coming from sources which were influenced by newspapers, and that means the newspaper barons, who were the ones who determined the policy of their papers, then it would always be tainted, and for that reason they felt it was important there should be at least one important news service which was untainted in any way by newspapers. And they were prepared to pay for the ABC to have a completely independent service.
Hello, everyone. This is the Country Hour, and your compere is Dixon Evans. Well, now for marketing information. In the Brisbane market this morning...
In the post-war days of ABC radio, one of the most important services was that for the man and woman on the land. The rural department was set up and headed by John Douglas.
In my early days in agriculture, farms would come into the stations, you know, their loads of wheat with horses, and some of them have to stay there 2 days because there's no way to take this wheat. But once we got going, we could tell them on the air that the trains had arrived last night and the following station would be accepting wheat, so that everybody would know. And then we'd say the aeroplane is 2 hours late today. And if there was floods, for example, Hunter River floods, our blokes would stay up all night and say, you want to move cattle off the Bulwarra Flats because the water conservation people tell us it's rising 6 feet, you know, and bushfires and things like that. And the response we used to get from our audience was perfect.
The ABC presents Blue Hills by Gwen Meredith. Hilda and Joe have settled down on the MacArthur's farm, and we left Joe helping Judy in the kitchen. He's handling the dishes with the confidence, but certainly not the skill of a juggler, and Judy says in alarm,
Oh, Joe, the new dinner set. Now, careful, you'll drop those plates.
Oh, no, they'll be right. Look, I can... Oh, gee.
Oh, whatever will Hilda say? For my glory.
A pedigree goat is a valuable animal. It needs care. We'll discuss the details of feeding later. But just now, I shall begin by emphasizing the fact that a goat will not eat anything.
By the early 50s, both rural programs and news were major forces in ABC radio. They became institutions with the advent of television.
Hello there, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and children. This emblem that you've just seen is tonight the symbol of a historic occasion, the opening of the National Television Service, which of course is your television service. And we hope that tonight, and in the weeks and years to come, that you're going to see and enjoy a lot more of it on ABN 2, ABN Channel 2. And my name is Michael Charlton, and I'm your host here tonight. I'm here to welcome you and show you around and let you meet a few of the people who are going to make this service tick.
Michael Charlton on the opening night of ABC television, November the 5th, 1956. Some might say we've come a long way since then. I wonder how we'll look in another 26 years from now. A few days after that opening in the Gore Hill studios, the ABC Melbourne began transmission with the 1956 Olympic Games and was host to 120 broadcasters from all over the world. Although the studios and equipment were primitive by today's standards, they were exciting days, as people on both sides of the camera and at home discovered what television could do. There were no videotape recording facilities, so most locally produced programs went live to air or on film. We can still see some of those shows because of a technique of filming them from a television monitor called tele-recording, and some of those old films survive in our archives today. So far have we advanced technically that we can even record them now on miniature video cassettes like this, and we can look at them privately in our own homes. One of those very early productions was the opera The Bartered Bride.
Whatever shall I do? I'm miserable.
Dearest girl, what is troubling you so? What has happened?
Oh, Nick, I'm so worried.
And the first live celebrity recital from the Sydney Town Hall featured the American soprano Leontyne Price. Today, the ABC's involvement in television is taken pretty well for granted. But it never was a foregone conclusion that the ABC would provide the national television service, as the then manager Sir Charles Moses recalls.
It's really confidential, but some members of the Commission at the time felt that the Australian economy couldn't stand two services, national and commercial, and were thinking in terms of sharing a single transmitter in Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth and Hobart, and certainly having to share the single transmitters in certain populous regional centres. I personally felt that there must be a national service, and I suppose I shouldn't give away some of the secrets of the things that we did to make sure that we got them. But the post office and the minister and the government were satisfied that we could start a service in Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth and Hobart on a shoestring. I think within a year of Sydney and Melbourne going, that was in '56, in November '56, within a year, it was so clear that television was going to succeed that even the Treasury was optimistic and was prepared to provide money.
In the first days of television, popular music programs gave a number of talented youngsters their first break in show business. The production methods may have been quaint, but some of the names are still well known today.
Make Ours Music, a sparkling mixture of song and dance for your entertainment, with our singing stars Babs McKinnon, Teddy Hamilton, Pat Munro, and Frank Ifield.
The moon and stars no longer shine.
During the live-to-air show, they even attempted a crude split-screen effect.
But why should I go? 'Cause I couldn't stay without you.
Oh, there you are. We've been waiting for you. Come in.
Also live-to-air was the Lorraine Desmond Show, featuring TV's resident naughty girl.
Song I'd like to sing for you now. It's very special, really, because it's all about my favorite pastime. It's called making whoopee. Another bride, another groom, another sunny honeymoon.
With the rock era less than 2 years old, the highlight of the week was the hit parade.
This broadcast
comes from our studios at Gore Hill. Jim Gussie and the ABC Dance Orchestra bring to you the 8 top popular tunes in
Your Hit Parade.
Once again, from north, south, east and west, throughout the length and breadth of the Commonwealth, the latest reports in the popular song situation have rolled in.
Wake up, little Susie, wake up. Wake up, little Susie, wake up.
Come on, everybody, it's 6 o'clock. Come on, everybody, it's time to rock. Well, let's stop, let's rock. Come on, everybody, it's 6 o'clock. Hi, once again, and welcome to 6 o'clock rock. We hope you're going to have a ball with us this afternoon. Got a twinkle in your eyes and a way to hypnotize. Makes me want to hold you tight. I want to make some love tonight. Whoa, don't ever, ever, ever leave my sight. Yeah, you excite me.
Only 1 year after television began, the world's first man-made satellite, the Russian Sputnik, was launched. Satellites were to become a vital part of our broadcasting and telecommunications in the future, but first we had to understand them. In this live-to-air interview spot, Bob Sanders, with Professor Harry Messel and colleagues, attempted to explain the Sputnik phenomenon.
What is the idea of the model?
Well, the thing was this, Bob. As soon as Sputnik appeared, hundreds and hundreds of telephone calls started coming in and people trying to get information from us on how this thing actually worked. Now, it's very, very difficult to get an appreciation of how this thing actually does work unless you can see it. And the moment you see it, as I think the viewers will in a few minutes' time, you'll be surprised at how simple it is actually to understand. So we went to the trouble to actually put a model together with the hope that we'd be able to make this thing much easier for the viewers.
Australia is now early morning. It's coming into light very soon.
Oh, yes, well, that's away from the camera.
That's away from the camera. We can see, however, on the other side. Let's watch for the next.
This
ride.
is quite exact. I mean, this would tell you
now
actually what
Sputnik appears and is over a place where they have still daylight. They can't see it. Now it's entering into a place where it's dark, and now Sputnik is over a region where it's night and is brightly illuminated by the sun.
And you have to know something about projectile motion, because did not this behave as a projectile, right? See, didn't I tell you the little boy said, oh, it's like when I throw a stone. See it? He had a feeling for the path. Well, we're going to do something about center of gravity. Do you know what we mean by center of gravity? Sort of, roughly, huh?
Yeah, I can't explain it very well.
But then you can't explain it, but then your knowledge is worthless. See it? If you can't explain it, then you don't know it very well, okay? And therefore, your learning must be of a different sort. You must be able to talk fluently about the subject. Otherwise, you don't know anything about it, okay? Come, I'm going to show you something. Good. Do you see that I have here an equilateral triangle, right? Susan, Stephen, huh? Good.
Professor Julius Sumner Miller in the early days of Why Is It So? Today he's still educating the inquisitive, but lately he's acquired that extra glass and a half of sweetness. Despite the unsophisticated style of some of the early variety and entertainment shows, the standard of education and drama programs was surprisingly high. Dramas like Stormy Petrel, about the life and times of William Bligh, and Pastures of the Blue Crane set a standard that survives well even today.
What did you say?
Don't try to bully me as though I were one of your unfortunate seamen.
Now understand this, young woman, once and for all. I absolutely forbid mention of the word bounty in this house. Is that clear?
What's the matter, Papa? Does your conscience still trouble you after all these years?
I will not have such talk. I'll not have it.
Your word may be Lord aboard ship, but you're not aboard ship now. Nor am I a child anymore, to be told what I can and cannot do.
Fire and damnation!
I shall marry whom I choose. Good night.
Mary, you will not marry John Putland. Never!
Sorry about that. No, I don't think I did too much damage. Not to worry. Oh, careful.
Same table as we had.
What a dump!
Some early TV comedy was like Radio with Pictures, but Spike Milligan, John Bluthal, Ray Barrett and company had a lot of fun with the Gladys half hour.
It's a great day, folks, and here we are at the start of the Empire Game Standing Still race. The starter calls the men. They're just getting on their starting blocks now. Get set, go, and they're off.
And now, here are the results of today's racing.
I say, you chaps. Yep. I've got a plan of escape. How far is it to the ground?
It's over 800 feet. The most lofty Heinrich is one of the tallest men in the German army. On a clear day, he can see the Statue of Liberty. Well, it's been another nice day in Sydney. And for that matter, most of New South Wales has had a pretty nice day. As you see, there's some high pressure here and some low pressure here. That means, Major, that the people in this area have high blood pressure. People in this area have low blood pressure.
By the 60s, almost every area of entertainment once provided by radio was now being covered by television. The ABC was innovator of many new and important programs, like the first of the TV soapies, a sort of Blue Hills on television and forerunner of shows like Number 96 and Country Practice. Bellbird had a record run of 436 episodes before dying a natural death in 1977. Here, Joe Turner and friend are having their usual run of outs.
No, mate, look on me. You know, things have all got on top of me. One flaming disaster after another. I just don't understand it anymore.
Well, maybe we should give the whole thing a miss.
Not on your life. Oh, no. We've been through one disaster after another, but we're going to put in an appearance, mate, even if it kills me.
Yeah, well, I'll be writing a tick.
Ah, well, we can have a few laughs over a few coldies later on, eh?
Now you're talking.
Oh, yeah.
Joe! Oh, Ruth! No!
Not long after television began, it became obvious that it was a most efficient means of informing people about matters of community interest. And in 1961, the ABC's MC for all occasions, Michael Charlton, appeared on a new program called Four Corners and got a response that took everyone by surprise, including the ABC.
As I stand here with my back to Cambridge Gulf and the waters of the Timor Sea, I'm very much closer to the land masses of Asia than I am to you in any of Australia's capital cities. Indonesia is only 300 miles away. Wyndham is closer by sea to Singapore than it is to Perth, and closer to Rangoon, to Hong Kong and Manila than either Sydney or Melbourne. Between you and me now are great rivers, cattle kingdoms, and desert. This is cattle country, and it was cattle that brought Wyndham into existence when the overlanders walked the first herds here in the 80s. From New South Wales...
When it began, Four Corners was a radical new approach to matters of interest to the community. Its first executive producer, Bob Raymond, and frontman Charlton enjoyed considerable success with their concept, but both left the ABC once it was established.
It's hard to believe the effect that Four Corners had on people in the remotest parts of Australia. And in fact, we discovered that wherever we went, that it was a sort of conversations amongst people revolved around what was in Four Corners on Saturday night. I mean, on a Monday in Australia, in the office or the factory or the club or the pub, if you didn't know what had been on Four Corners, you somehow felt a bit out of it.
Despite early nervousness and alleged attempts to muzzle the program, Four Corners grew in strength and stature, showing during the Vietnam War the style of reporting that made the program required viewing.
Bien Hoa Air Base is a sprawling complex of military camps surrounding an airstrip. This is where you find Australia's main commitment to the war effort in Vietnam, the 1st Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment. These are the Australian diggers of 1966. How do they feel about the war and the demonstrations at home against Australia playing a part in it?
Well, personally, I reckon they should be ashamed to call themselves Australians. Because, well, heck, once they take over Southeast Asia, what's next on their list.
Between us and the hill is a small Cambodian village. The villagers are frightened. They have no way of knowing they are not the targets. The lack of regard between Cambodians and Vietnamese has already cost many civilian lives. The shooting stops. The results? Nobody can know.
Back home, Four Corners continued to raise issues that drew heavy fire from some sections of government and big business. This story also earned Four Corners one of several awards for outstanding journalism.
Despite Utah's massive coal reserves, the company was, until last year, limited by a Queensland law which stipulated that Utah could not mine more than 300 million tonnes. At present production rates, this would have taken about 20 years. However, Mr. Bjelke-Petersen has amended the law, giving Utah access to another 150 million tonnes. Mr. Bjelke-Petersen's enthusiasm for mineral development in Queensland goes far beyond mere political rhetoric. For the Premier himself has a personal interest in the development of the state's coal reserves.
No, I think you shouldn't say a thing like that. I have no coal interests. All my family have no coal interests. I don't know what makes you say you ought to withdraw that.
These official documents from the Brisbane Stock Exchange and the company's office show that a company called Oilmin has tendered to the Queensland government to supply coal to a State Electricity Commission powerhouse to be commissioned in the mid-1980s. But I'm not the State Premier, sir, and this company of which you hold shares is tendering to your own government to supply coal.
Yes. Would you like to have a premier or a minister or government that never owned anything, never did anything, never achieved anything? Is that the sort of person you'd like to have?
Well, if it meant that there was a possible conflict of interest, then I think I would.
Would you resign?
Well, I'm not suggesting you should resign, sir. I'm just wondering whether there is any potential conflict of interest here in you tendering to yourself.
There is no conflict of interest. You can be quite sure about that.
In 1965, public awareness and interest in issues like the Vietnam War was growing. Discussion of current events both at home and abroad meant it was just a matter of time before daily current affairs programs emerged on both radio and television. On ABC television, it was a program that had its beginnings in Tasmania as Line-Up, and which was introduced in 1967 as This Day Tonight in Sydney, Melbourne and Canberra. With it came a young man named Bill Peach, who's now got quite a few runs on the board, and a couple of colleagues who like to get on top of things.
Bang. And he rattles the pickets behind square leg. A jolly good shot, sir. That brings up the century. Cricket. Oscar Wilde said he wouldn't play cricket because of the indecent postures it forced him to assume. But he was way out of step. Cricket, damn it, is what made the empire great.
This is Gerald Stone reporting to you from the top of Australia's highest building, Australia Square in downtown Sydney.
This is Gordon Bick reporting to you from the second highest building in Australia, the State Office Block, 34 stories high.
In its 11 years, TDT developed from a news magazine-style program into a hard-hitting, investigative look at the major issues of the day. Often it included comment that upset politicians, newspapers and some sections of business and government. But it won ratings and accolades too for stories like this one on poverty in Sydney by reporter Caroline Jones.
And up here, as I told you, I was in bed and it fell down on me up there.
Now,
and the laundry too is disgusting. I'm ashamed for people to come into the place. I'm ashamed.
Mrs. Wiley's landlord is not a development company, nor a businessman, nor a profit-making concern at all, in theory. Mrs. Wiley's landlord is the Church of England, one of the biggest landlords in Sydney, especially here in Glebe, where street after street after street is lined with property owned by the church.
They were often called the young whippersnappers of TDT, the journalists who gave the program its fresh, often impudent style. While the papers proclaimed year after year that it couldn't last, one Postmaster General even directed the ABC to cut its current affairs budget. This jibe at ASIO was typical of the reporting that upset some politicians.
Don, look, I've found out one good thing. Apparently between 1965 and 1969, ASIO barred 200 migrants their Australian citizenship.
One case of the use of ASIO files that did cause a storm concerned a Sydney woman by the name of Mrs. Anne Michaelis and the present Education Minister, Mr. Malcolm Fraser. Mr. Fraser, Army Minister in 1966, pulled out an ASIO file in Parliament to nail the mother of a schoolboy who had refused to continue in the school cadets. He said Mrs. Michaelis, mother of Robert, was a committee member of an organisation that wasn't even communist, but communist-inspired.
By 1972, public opinion had been changed by the Vietnam conflict, and a majority of the electorate gave its mandate to the first Labor government since that of Ben Chifley in 1949.
The adventures of Edward Gough Whitlam, dinky-die tales of a Labour boy.
And with it came a whole new stable of characters for the TDT firing line. Somehow, though, they seemed to take it better than their predecessors.
Like God, but the Liberals find it risky to belittle him, 'cause it's dangerous to take on Gough Whitlam.
OK, so you're the life of the party. You stand out in the crowd, but are you really nice to be near? Are you confident that your teeth are as white as they should be? Or do you worry that mouth freshness might let you down? Hear what Gough Whitlam has to say.
There can be the trap. One's too confident.
Get the ring of confidence with new Parliament. New Parliament with double dissolution fights bad breath and keeps your teeth laughing clean.
But it wasn't all politics and multinationals. There was a time when, for a moment, it seemed the program had found its own Harry Butler.
John Cullen is an ambulance bearer employed by the Innisfail branch of the Queensland Ambulance Transport Brigade. Right now he's off duty, but like most ambulance personnel, he's involved in fundraising for brigade equipment. And that's exactly what he's doing, raising money for the local ambulance, though this unwilling contributor proved to be dangerously uncooperative.
He's endeavouring now to get around me and apply pressure and constriction, which he is exceptionally strong. And if I let him get around my neck...
Which he just has done?
Which he just has done.
Shall I try and get him up?
No, I think you can try. By the tail.
If it gets the right grip, a python can break bones. And this specimen, despite the apparently slapstick humour of the situation, was trying its best to do just that.
Can I help?
Yeah.
Is he hurting
I'm putting the shoe out.
Eh?
Get the shoe off. From below. Oh boy.
Can't get it.
I'm going to go over. You're right. Oh, let me get you. Right, yeah, that's better.
Today, ABC Television Public Affairs is said to be living in the shadow of earlier days, when it was new and free from the pressures brought about by its own success. But the growing strength of TDT's successor, Nationwide, and its newest acquisition, Geraldine Doog, indicate that it'll be here for some time yet.
But people are sick of the formula, or the straight formula, and they want to see the formula changed, and they want to be, they want the pictures to be better, and we've got to try and somehow make the pictures good, but also the information just as good.
Then, at the eastern end of the ground, with police and spectators caught off guard, the marchers threw themselves against the wire fence and through sheer weight of numbers and the element of surprise, forced their way through the goalposts onto the pitch, carrying journalists and camera crews with them.
This Nationwide report was made in New Zealand during the recent Springbok rugby tour.
It was a Mexican standoff. A solid phalanx of demonstrators linked arms on the halfway line and refused to budge as rugby spectators yelled abuse and a police riot squad ran out from the stand. With the start to the game looking more and more out of the question, the rugby authorities ordered all television people out of the ground.
Any more television here? Right, well, that's you out.
Why are you moving television off? Come on. I'm not OK, well, outside, mate.
Nationwide in New Zealand. Since the mid-70s, many people feel the ABC has lived with the legacy of those heady days when politicians were fair game and sacred cows were ripe for slaughter. It's true that in the last 6 years, the ABC has experienced hard times with reductions in annual allocations and firmly imposed staff ceilings. Meanwhile, the competition from the relatively well-off commercial networks has been growing steadily. Many areas that were pioneered and developed by the ABC are now being covered by the commercials, and ABC-trained staff have gone too. But despite the continuing restraints, the ABC developed new programs in the 70s and introduced one or two characters like Peter Werrett, Harry Butler and Auntie Jack.
Well, I think it's probably fair to say that the men like it better than the women. Actually, it's a combination of a number of things. Some rain, some shine, just like our test weather. The brakes and the performance and the handling are good, but the design and the interior comfort are not, and certainly not good enough for a car of the year.
Oh, look at this one. One of the big forest centipedes. Isn't he beautiful? Tough little baby. They're only little, but they got some mighty sharp teeth. Oh, boy, can these fellas swim.
Hello, me little lovelies. Welcome to dried elephant arrangements for beginners. A step-by-step instruction in the art of elephanto reducioso. Or get out of me bloody way, Colin. Dried elephant arrangements or bonsai and large elephant. Here are some of me little darlings doing a few commercial tricks. Now the little... Oh, stop it. Now the little man you can see in the photograph here, right? Now, he's not dehydrated by any means. Now, that'd be very cruel. In fact, he's his own stupid, ridiculous small self all the time for reasons that he's a very unwell man. Oh, very smart, Colin. Oh, listen, I'm going to rip your bloody trunk off if you don't watch it. Anyway, get him back here. What have I got left? You spilled the paint, you buggered everything. Right, move your nose, get it up. Unfortunately, this little man is no longer with us. As one day he was balancing one of the little elephants on his finger when all of a sudden it swelled up and the bloody thing come down and crushed him to death.
Really hope this time, like a piece of cheese.
The Auntie Jack team, led by Graham Bond, with Rory O'Donoghue, John Derham and Gary MacDonald, who went on to become Australia's own little bleeder, Norman Gunston. And the Auntie Jack show had its beginnings on radio, the medium that had been very much the poor relation of television since the mid-50s. But in the first 10 years of television, radio began to identify for itself a new role and a new audience. The transistor meant that radio became truly portable and very personal.
Up to the dormitory one day and took the chamber pot from underneath the bed of the teacher in charge and filled it with Eno's fruit salts. And then they waited that night for the results.
What do you mean with results?
Oh, Clive.
Come on now, I'm not...
When chamber pots are put into use.
Into use.
There we go.
There you go.
End of story. We have the gripe session today at 8:30.
I didn't understand that.
Didn't you?
No.
Thousands did.
Didn't you?
Mm-hmm.
You were being dirty again, you know.
I'm not
You know
being
men
dirty.
like it when you talk dirty. They get quite excited.
Clive Robertson and Margaret Throsby, a duo who brighten up Sydney's early morning radio. $1 million installation on Cox Peninsula near Darwin. But on Christmas Eve 1974, the new station was wiped out by Cyclone Tracy.
Well, this is my last day in what will probably be known in the future as Old Darwin. In the last week or so, incredible things have happened, incredible individual efforts have been made, brave promises of a new Darwin and a safer and better Darwin. But Darwin was a place of character. It wasn't a very pretty place. It was a place of people with a unique way of life, and I only hope the new Darwin has that character. This is Mike Hayes for ABC News, and the wreckage of what was once a bloody good place to live.
For the rescue workers, it was a slow, frustrating job trying to clear the rubble from the carriages. They knew some people were still alive, but there was no quick way of getting to them. At one stage, 3 medical teams were performing emergency amputations in the carriages themselves. However, the death toll is certain to rise in the wake of today's major rail disaster at Granville.
Two of the major local stories handled by ABC News in the last 10 years. By the mid-70s, aided by advances in telecommunications technology, equipment like this, ABC News was able to call on its own representatives and correspondents in most parts of the world, and had its own network of journalists all over Australia. As regional networks expanded with local news requirements in specific areas, so the output increased until today ABC News prepares and presents 330 separate news bulletins on radio and television each day. And one of the stalwarts of that news for the past 33 years, Jim Dibble, has been presenting bulletins continuously almost since the ABC's independent news began. This is what he looked like when television news was in its infancy.
Good evening. The Indonesian government has begun its invasion of rebel-held Central Sumatra. First reports of the invasion were received from Singapore early this morning. It follows to conserve some of the land in its natural state. And that's all the news tonight from ABC National Television. Our next bulletin will be at the usual time tomorrow afternoon, 1 o'clock.
Ian McIntosh, ABC News in Buenos Aires.
This is Tony Joyce reporting from the Chongwei Bridge for ABC News.
Jeff McMullen in Washington.
Paul Lockyer, ABC News, Bangkok.
Trevor Watson at the Khyber Pass for ABC National News.
Hello. Yes, my name's Norman Gunston. I'm from Australia. I was wondering if I could have a few words to ex-President Richard M. Nixon. I'm from a television show, the Australian Broadcasting Commission. I do in-depth interviews. Do you understand me? Hello?
We are marching, the Kiss Army. We are marching. Isn't this exciting? I'm never going to take this makeup off. No one will ever recognise me, except my manager, my landlady, and my skin specialist.
I'm terribly sorry. Look, I'm sorry. I would, but look, I've got to get home to watch Countdown.
And now for something completely different. Welcome to Countdown.
On the top hat, tying up a white tie, brushing up a tail. I'm doing up my shirt front, putting in the shirt studs, polishing my nails. Only blue, it's gotta be blue.
Since the retirement of Sir Charles Moses in 1965, implementation of commission policy and development of the ABC organisation has been the responsibility of General Manager Sir Talbot Duckmanton, who retires next month. While Parliament considers the far-reaching recommendations of the Dixon inquiry, he sees the ABC's position today as a direct result of the government's overall policy on broadcasting.
The Australian community has made a considerable financial, technical and social investment in broadcasting. And yet, after 50 years, during which time people have talked at great length about the importance of radio and television, about the influence of broadcasting on people's lives, I find it intriguing that our Parliament has not at any time attempted to set down a set of objectives for the Australian broadcasting system as a whole. The result, I think, is that we now have a patchwork, and I think the community doesn't really know what it has a right to expect from its broadcasting system, and I think the broadcasters themselves don't have something which attempts to make clear to them what the community expects them to provide.
Over recent years, there's been recurring criticism about the ABC's alleged lack of response to community needs and also to your style of management in particular. Is that something you'd care to comment on?
No, I'm aware of the criticisms that have been made. Some of them have been directed at me personally, and some of them have been made at the organisation as a whole, or the procedures that it follows. The procedures and the organisation that we have are in no small measure the result of the legislation under which we operate and the regulations made under the legislation. The organisation has had to, in recent years, live through a period of considerable difficulty, financial difficulties, staffing difficulties, in a time of inflation when the government, quite understandably, has been anxious to reduce spending in the public sector and to restrict expenditure in the public sector. But that has made it very difficult for the ABC to operate, particularly when the commercial stations, our principal competitors, if I can put it that way, have been operating on a very profitable basis. And I also believe that in recent years one has had to, in management, give a great deal of attention, much more attention than in the past, to establishing, to preserving the stability of the organisation at a time when we have had rapid changes, really, in the composition of the Commission itself. There was a period when I had four different chairmen in 14 months with whom I had to work.
While maintaining quality program output in a climate of cutbacks and increasing competition from the commercial networks, is there a danger the ABC could make itself redundant? The Commission's first woman chairman, Professor Leontyne Price, thinks not.
Well, it depends which areas you look at. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, I think, and our current affairs programs, of course, have been imitated on commercial television. And that's a good thing. That really does increase the standard of television current affairs programs overall.
Do you think the ABC will be able to continue to do its job despite political and economic pressures in, say, the next decade, 20 years?
Yes, I do indeed, and I believe that for a couple of reasons. I think we're criticised because we're important. You don't bother to criticise something that doesn't matter. You only criticise things when you feel their significance within the whole society, and I think that's precisely the position of the ABC. Now, I think we should be sensitive to that criticism. Some of it we shouldn't attract. We shouldn't attract certain kinds of criticism about bias and so on. We should be very careful that we don't. But we should expect to be the centre of controversy because we are dealing with public and controversial issues a great deal of the time, and also because we're the cutting edge of broadcasting. We are the innovators, and we always have been, and I think we should continue to be. And that's another way of saying, perhaps, that we are, in the past, we have been indispensable to the Australian community, and we are indispensable now. If you ask people what this country would be like without the ABC, they find it inconceivable. It's not something that people can imagine. And I think that that is an attitude which will never go away as long as we play the role that we've been playing and continue to be innovative and in advance, not just technically, we may not be in advance at the moment, but in ideas.
How vulnerable do you see the organisation being to economic restraints brought about by political considerations?
Well, I think we will be vulnerable to those economic restraints if we are not seen as indispensable. We've got to make ourselves indispensable, and then our vulnerability, I think, is greatly reduced.
As the ABC enters its second half-century of broadcasting, the question now is whether it will be allowed to continue functioning in the way we've come to know it, or whether recommendations from such bodies as the Dix Committee will bring major changes in its structure and its role. Perhaps the best way to assess its value is to look at its cost. Last financial year, the ABC spent $184 million, 5 cents a day per head of population, or 1/5 the cost of the cheapest daily newspaper. By comparison, the cost to Australia of the commercial radio and television networks is currently around $1,000 million, and that comes out of your pocket as well. Today, the ABC is the one truly national information service. It belongs to you, and its future is in your hands. That future, no doubt, will depend on whether, in your view, the ABC has earned its place as a vital part of the life of Australia. Good night.
Celebrate 50 years of the ABC this weekend with ABC Radio. Starting 8 o'clock Saturday morning on 6WF, we'll have birthday features throughout the day. And on Sunday, 6WN takes over, commencing 9 o'clock and continuing throughout the day and into the night. Celebrate 50 years of air radio this weekend, 6WF Saturday, 6WN Sunday, and ABC regional stations. This is the ABC. We're 50.
Australia, it's time for Countdown.
Tonight with Mondo Rock. Molly talks to Brian Ferry. And Australian Crawl shut down.